Welcome to the Art and Faith Podcast. I'm Jamie Thompson, talking with Alexandra Boylan of the Boylan Sisters, one of my favorite filmmakers. I love the trajectory that this company is on. I love the story. I love the humans behind it. And I'm just so excited for this conversation and excited to share it with our listeners. So Alexandra, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I want to start by just asking you to tell us a little bit about your company, who's in it, how long have you kind of been doing what you're doing, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty of that as we go.
Yeah, so just recently, my sister and I, Andrea Polnazik, we rebranded to the Boylan Sisters. We used to be Mustard Seed Entertainment. We started off. I moved to LA in 1999 and was pursuing acting. And then I pounded the pavement for 10 years, and that's a whole long story. And then in 2009, I actually packed my bags and I moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I decided that it was time to choose myself. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't going to wait for people to pick me anymore as an actor. And I started learning how to produce, and I taught myself screenwriting and producing, and I got together with all these awesome indie filmmakers in New Mexico, and we started making stuff. And then we made a bunch of shorts. We were teaching ourselves, learning. And then we decided, let's just make a feature. So we made a thriller in one location in New Mexico, paid out of pocket to make the movie. Mm-hmm. Got my friends together. It was like 5 crew members and 4 actors.
Yeah.
But talented people. Yeah. And then we finished that and we ended up selling it to a major distribution company. And the crazy thing is that I was sitting with my sales agent talking about another one, and he said, don't make another thriller. You know what you should be doing? You should be making faith-based family movies. Mm. And I was like, whoa, like I feel like the God just struck the table and was like, I'm calling you to make faith-based films. Wow. And at first I was like, wait, whoa, that wasn't the trajectory I was on. But then, and this was back in 2012, I looked at the landscape and I did not see myself being represented. I didn't see women in leading roles. And I was like, my sales agent was like, I'll get you the money if you make the movie. And I said, okay. And I said, yes, always say yes, and then figure it out as you go. Yes. We had made a feature, so we knew that we could make a feature. I called my sister Andrea and I said, would you want to come on this journey with me? I want to write a female-driven, faith-based film. But my sales agent actually said, no, you can't do that. There's no numbers in the marketplace to back up a female-driven faith-based film. Right. And he goes, I can't raise the money. And I was like, well, I think that's because nobody's doing it. But if we do it, we can prove there's an audience. And and so we did it, and I gave up my apartment. Yep. And I put everything I owned in storage, and I lived out of one suitcase for a year to make our first female-driven faith-based film called Catching Faith. And the budget was $75,000. Yep. And we ended up going on to sell it for triple the budget to a major distribution company. Yep. And it went on to become the top 5 consistent selling movie for the distribution company.
Yeah, that's the kind of story we love.
Amen. And we were invited to Cuba on a movie tour. We've been all over the world. The movie's gone all over the world, women telling their stories of how it spoke to them. And then we knew we were onto something, speaking to an audience that is me. I'm that audience. I'm a minister's kid. I'm a woman. And so that's where we started. We were like, let's make female-driven faith films from the female gaze. Mm-hmm. And then my sister and I took over the company the last year, and we're really, really passionate about telling teen girl stories too, mother-daughter stories that speak to teens. Mm-hmm. So we feel like that's been an empty market of where's the Mean Girls meets Freaky Friday for Christian girls. And that's where we're Disney for Christians.
Yeah. I love that. And I will say that when I first met you, I was really excited about what I heard you saying, but I've heard other people say things kind of like that before. Okay. Like, I'm trying to fill this niche, I'm trying to serve the family, and then some of the product was not as enjoyable to view as I hoped it would be. So I met you, I loved you. I got my kids together and I said, I want you to watch this. And the first thing of yours that we saw was Switched. And my kids are not easy on content. Like they're normal kids. They get to watch a lot of stuff. We follow Jesus, but we do have a lot of freedom in our home. Mm-hmm. And so they watched it, and the next day they were having a sleepover and they chose it to share with their friends of their own choice. And I was like, okay, that means something to me. Yeah. You know, that's what they wanted to share. They were excited about it. They had conversation about it. And then I asked their friends, you know, what'd you think about that? And they were like, it was just kind of like nice not to feel gross after watching something, but it was fun. And they talked about the graphics. They talked about the outfits. Yeah. I mean, it was really at a level that created a world that they felt like they identified with. And that for me was the first time my kids had been able to engage in something made for their age group that was faith-based, that really worked.
Right.
They weren't rooting for it. They were just enjoying it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
No, that just made my whole day. That's our dream. That was our dream, was Switched. And, you know, when I took Switched out, I pounded the pavement in the studio system. And it was really hard because it is kind of trailblazing. There wasn't anything in the market like this.
Yeah.
And we're trying to, and the faith-based studios were like, we don't get this switching bodies thing. And I'm like, it's just a parable. It's just a parable for kids to enjoy it. And then I go to mainstream, and of course, they didn't want to keep it clean. They wanted to have the girls do inappropriate things. And I was like, no way. This is to empower young women to love one another. And so that makes me so happy. And for us, it was so important about the clothes, because I grew up wanting to watch these movies, things my parents wouldn't see. I wanted to fill a need for young girls to be like, this is for me. It's clean, but it's as hip as everything else. We wanted them to go to school and be like, you got to see this movie and be proud of it. Not like, oh, my mom and dad made me watch this movie and I don't want anyone to know.
Yeah.
We wanted it to feel like they could have ownership over it and be excited and proud of it. And that's our dream. So the fact that you have that.
Yeah. I'm not going to name the shows, but I will say there are things that I've watched that I'm not really proud of, like having sat with that content, but I've honestly watched it because the fashion was so awesome.
Right.
And I wanted to see the outfits, grown women, young women. There've just been some great examples of fashion on film. And so I am grateful that you're creating that.
Yes. Well, you know what's interesting is same with Catching Faith, our first film. Lorena Seguro, who's the lead, is actually amazing with fashion, and she put all the clothes together. And I was like, the clothes have to be amazing. One thing I noticed in faith-based is I feel like for faith-based films I've watched, the clothes haven't been outstanding. I'm like, all of our films, you'll see we try to focus on the clothing and making sure that it's fun and beautiful. And the other thing with Switch was, I worked really closely with my production, my costume designer, because I was like, I want this to feel like Disney. Yeah. And he was like, I'm really struggling because I'm looking at what the kids are wearing and it's not appropriate. And I go, exactly. Let's make it cool to dress appropriate. So this is your job, is to figure out how to make it hip and cute and appropriate so that girls want to dress like that.
Right.
He did such a good job.
Clothing doesn't have to be just a way to show the body.
Exactly.
It's a way to show the person.
Exactly.
The whole person, who's much more than the body. It's the mind and the personality and all the things. So I think that's super exciting. May there be more of it.
Yes.
I think everybody who meets you is going to want to get to do what I'm doing. You know, they're going to be like, oh, well, I want to follow this path. I have a daughter that wants to act. I have a niece that's in this space. I want to hear more about how to pursue this. And so I think you've had that question a lot. So you wrote a book. Tell us the name of the book and where we can find it.
I wrote a book called Create Your Own Career in Hollywood, and which is really filmmaking. You don't have to be in Hollywood for it. And it's on Amazon, and it really goes through the trajectory of my career. And I actually used to write for a site called Ms. in the Biz. For 6 years, I was a writer for the site, encouraging women to get behind the camera and tell stories. And what was really cool about that was that I was writing for the site while I was in the trenches, making movies, when I was homeless, when I was in distribution. So I actually pulled a lot of the material from that and put it into a book, because everyone's like, can I take you to coffee and pick your brain? I'm like, I don't have 5 hours, but here, read my book. And this is how I did it, because I'm a minister's kid, came from Massachusetts, moved to LA, and I've built my entire career from scratch. I've taught myself a lot. I've learned from experts. I am always learning from people. I never say, oh, I know more. I always go, no, please teach me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Right. And I've surrounded myself with like the most talented people who teach me, and I glean from that and put it into the next project and the next project. So.
Yeah. I want to pull out something you said there, because I think a lot of people want to write a book and tell their story, and they're like, when is the right time to do that? I feel like that's part of my path and a thing that needs to happen. And I think what you were responding to can be a really great why, when you find that there is something about you that so many people want to know that you simply can't take the time to tell each person one at a time. So you need a delivery mechanism that accelerates that. That is a great why for writing these things down and for sharing them. So I just wanted to pull that out and highlight it.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I did. I was getting and I was going to coffee with people. I was driving around LA, getting coffee with people who would write me on Instagram or write me on Facebook. And then it just got to the point where I was like, okay, I don't have time for this, but if I put it together in a book now I tell people, read my book and then reach out to me with a question after you read the book.
Yes.
Because it's like me trying to sit down with you and start exactly what we're doing right now, start my career from scratch to tell you everything. It would just take too long. So now the book is a great way to learn everything I've done. And I'm very honest and vulnerable in it and telling everything of how, all the struggles.
Yeah.
There's a lot of struggles.
Yeah.
But it's so worth it.
We hope you're enjoying the Art and Faith podcast brought to you by 5 Talents Fund. You made decisions.
Yeah.
You made real choices about your actual life, not just about that season of work, but about your own comfort.
Yeah.
And there was sacrifice in that.
Yeah.
I just want you to be a little bit, lean into that part of the story just a little bit more, because nobody wants to believe that's what's going to happen. We all think we're going to get whatever our field is. Somehow we live with this myth. Maybe it's from the movies that we're going to get discovered and fairy godmothers will arrive with budget and support and comfort because we are so awesome and we have such a beautiful story. And we are awesome. We do have a beautiful story.
Yeah.
But it's hard.
It's so hard.
Tell us about the hard just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I spent 10 years in Los Angeles pounding the pavement as an actor, and I really felt like a failure when I moved to New Mexico. But I see now, with life in the rearview mirror, that God was actually using all those things I was learning in my 20s that was going to prepare me for my 30s. So I always say, like, nothing is wasted. There is no such thing as failure. Sometimes you have to pivot. I've pivoted a lot in my career. But, to go into the Catching Faith thing, when my sales agent said, I'll give you $75,000, I'll raise $75,000 if you make the movie. I had an apartment in Hancock Park. I could not afford to make a $75,000 movie and keep my apartment.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what? I believe in this. I believe that we need to be the ones to make a female-driven, faith-based film. Yeah. And if no one does it, then how can we prove that it would do well? Right. And then pave the way for other women. So I put everything I owned in storage. I gave up my apartment. I moved in with my sister to write the script for Catching Faith, and I spent the next year traveling Catching Faith, Wisconsin to New Mexico to LA, back to New Mexico, and we shot the movie that summer. But the whole time, I didn't even have an address. I was traveling around, writing the script, doing pre-production, and then actually the funny thing is, my sales agent, once we had everything lined up, we had the script, we had actors, we had a location, we had all the things. We called our sales agent. We were like, okay, we're ready for the money. And he was like, do you know how many people I've made given this opportunity to and no one's ever taken it?
Wow.
And he was like, but we did it. I was like, you told me that you do it. I'm going to jump on it. And I lined everything up. And then he was able to go and get the movie, which is another testament that people get offered things and you have to take charge of it and create it. Yeah. And then the money will come. Or you've got to write the script and then the opportunity will come. Yeah. So, and then it was crazy because I was so nervous during that time of not having a home. Would I be able to afford to come back to LA? How would I do it? And then, of course, God provided. And, a couple years later, I'm standing in Cuba in churches, speaking to women, telling the story of how I gave up my home. And these women telling us how the movie changed their life. And I was like, those 4 walls mean nothing to me to see what God was going to do with my life. I'll do it all over again. I always tell God, I'll give it all up again if He wanted me to, especially because I care about my audience. I think that's another thing. I love my audience. I love the women. I love the girls I'm talking to. Every single girl who watches our films, I pray every morning for anyone who's going to turn on one of our films and pray that God would bless them in their life. And so I care so much, I would give it all up again because I love what I do and I love the people I'm doing it for.
Yeah, I think that's a huge piece of stewardship. Sometimes we just pray for the thing we want.
Yeah.
I want to do this. I want to express my dreams. I want to, get these things knocked off my list. And you've got to love the person that's going to interact with the art. And part of loving them is loving them long past that moment of creation. Yeah. And I love that because I know that prayer moves God's heart. I know He responds to it. And so your investment in prayer in that way matters.
Well, and I felt like I spent 10 years out of the will of God. I really felt like for 10 years I was struggling and I thought God wanted this. And then I was like, and in 2009, when I moved to New Mexico, I literally resurrendered my life to the Lord. And I was like, okay, God, whatever I'm doing for my life isn't working. Please guide me. I'll do whatever you want. I opened my hands. I go, I'll give up acting. I'll give up the film industry. What do you want me to do? And I, ever since then, have always sought the kingdom of heaven.
Back to this thing about, wanting to chase our own dreams, wanting to do what we want to do, wanting to center ourselves in the story is kind of I think an early thing in following God as a creative. And even Christian culture will sometimes tell us to follow our passion or identify our unique gifts and celebrate those.
Yeah. And I'd love to tell a quick story about that because I think it's so inspiring and so also going, wait on the Lord. I know sometimes we're like, why isn't God doing this right now? We do that all the time, right? Why?
Absolutely.
And, we had written The Greatest Inheritance, and then we wrote Switched, and then we were pushing those movies around, trying to get them made. Then RLJ Releasing came back and said, would you make a sequel to Catching Faith? So Andrew, but they said, we won't give you the money. You have to make it and we'll buy it.
Okay.
And we were like, oh my gosh, how much work that is. But so Andrew and I were like, let's just write Catching Faith 2. Yeah. Let's at least have the script. So we write that. And in the meantime, we're still out there trying to raising funding for Switched Inheritance. And I got this partner, this woman, Meredith Riley Stewart, from Women in Film, who wanted to make Inheritance with me. We were flying to Georgia trying to raise the money. Couldn't get that movie off the ground. Then we got some money for Switched, but it wasn't enough. So then that investor said, what if we did Catching Faith 2 first? It's a smaller budget. We know the distribution company is going to buy it. Okay. So we're like, okay, we got the script. We went off and we made Catching Faith 2. Then that investor was like, okay, we trust you. Now we'll trust you with a little more. Yeah. And they invested on Switched. And in the meantime, my partner from Inheritance is like, why is Inheritance not getting the funding? Why is it we made Catching Faith, we made Switched? And then Switched comes out in the pandemic when every child is at home sitting in their house on their computers. And it was like, God, the timing of Switch coming out when kids need an anti-bullying, love your neighbor as yourself, inspirational story while they're sitting in their home. And then we finally, after Switch, raised the money for The Greatest Inheritance.
Yep.
We shot The Greatest Inheritance of July of 2020. The Greatest Inheritance is the only script we have that is one location and 7 actors. And it was the only movie we could have ever made during a pandemic. And I was like, oh my gosh, do you see what God was doing? He was lining up all the other movies because he knew when these things happen in your career, in your life, it really helps you go, okay, I do not need to worry about anything. God is lining up. If he wants it, it'll happen. And he's going to do it in his timing. And then The Greatest Inheritance, which is all about the only thing we inherit on earth is the kingdom of heaven, comes out right after a pandemic where everyone's lost so much. And we put out a movie to remind them, you didn't lose anything because you still have Jesus. And we were like, oh my gosh, God, you're so good. I get goosebumps. Like, that's why. And so that gives you the confidence to know, I just have to keep knocking on doors. I have to keep trying it, but let God do the rest.
What's the best advice that you've received from the experts in your field?
Okay, the best advice, which changed my life and my career, was learning that your key art, your poster, is one of the most important parts of your film. And you can put all the money that you have into a film, but if you don't create a professional, well-made poster, you might not get the attention of the distribution company and you might not get the attention of the audience. And I had no idea how important key art was until I met Dog and Pony Creative, these 2 women who ended up mentoring me and teaching me. And they were like, think about it. The distribution company is probably not going to watch your movie. They're first going to look at your piece of key art. Does it sell? Is it marketable? Do you know your audience? We sold 2 movies straight off of a poster to a distribution company.
Wow.
They hadn't even watched the movie. They knew how to market the movie with the poster because we did the marketing for them. And then when those films came out on the shelves of Walmart, on Netflix, think about it. You're just scrolling through images. So if you don't know a star name and Brad Pitt or whatever isn't on the cover, you've got to convey to the audience why they want to watch the movie in that quick image. Every single one of our movies are on the shelves of Walmart because they knew what Walmart buys. And Walmart picks off of a poster. So all those things. So that was a huge lesson I learned. Your trailer, the first 10 minutes of your movie are the most important because that's what's going to grab your audience to stay. It's what's going to make the distribution company buy it. My sales agent has given us so much advice over the years, and we always listen to him because he knows he's in the meetings with the distribution company. I might be like, oh, I love this. This is a great idea. And he's like, that's not going to sell. And I'm like, okay. And then, you have to listen to all the people who know what's selling, what's marketable. You hear a lot of independent filmmakers go, oh, I love this. Well, there is a difference between loving something and selling something. Is the story going to sell to the masses?
Yeah.
So there is that, like, I love what I'm doing, but I'm also always trying to making it marketable, making it people want to buy it, not just, oh, this is just a passion project for me that maybe everybody else isn't going to want to buy.
Yeah.
And then also being really smart with your budgets, because the second you make a movie, the first question every investor is going to ask is, how much money did you make? So do not overstep your budget, because if you don't get it back, then you won't get an investor to come back. We have incrementally moved up in our budgets and always paid our investors back on every single movie.
Good job. Yeah, that's not something that everyone can say. And if you've made a film or been an investor, you know that. Yeah. Okay, so there's this interesting thing you just said that I think covers all creatives. So you have given a word to the wise here. Listen to the counsel that people give you. Like, it's foolish to go request counsel and then say, I didn't like that counsel, I'm going to set it aside. Listen. However, earlier in our conversation, you talked about this space where people said, I don't think that'll sell. I don't think there's an audience for that. And you were like, I'm not going to listen there. Because your drive compelled you forward, and this belief that you could create a space and do something new compelled you. So how do you kind of discern when to listen and when to say, I'm going to press because of this conviction I have?
When I was pitching my movies to studios who are guys, they weren't me. They didn't know what girls loved. I've had studio execs say, why do the girls care about their friends in high school? I'm like, that's all girls care about. So I knew that we needed someone to come in and sort of stir it up and be like, I'll be the one to go after it. But then also, you're right. It's interesting, because that's also goes back to the will of God. How do we know if it's God's will or our own will? And like, that can be so hard. I'm like, do I want this or does God want this? I don't want to like push and that's the same with like, but I knew for female-driven faith-based films, I just felt like nobody was doing it. And I also felt like there was a need in the marketplace, and I saw that need, and I love that audience. My sales agent has been such an incredible person, because I can go to him with like 5 log lines and say, what do you think we should write? What should we make? And he'd be like, we had a lot of Christmas log lines before we had Wish for Christmas. And he was like, no, that's boring. Sorry, that's not going to sell. No. And then when we pitched him Wish for Christmas, he was like, bingo, that's the one. So it wasn't even, I wasn't like, oh, I have to tell this story. I also want to make sure that I'm listening to the experts who work with me, who believe in me, that they're not going to steer me wrong either, that he wants us to succeed. So he's helping us make sure that we're on track. We're always pitching log lines like that.
So I think that's such a key thing about gatekeepers, if there is such a thing, out there. I think people think gatekeepers are guarding the gate.
No.
And I think gatekeepers are trying to throw the gate open, like they're desperately hoping the next brilliant person is going to come to the gate. Please come in. Please be awesome. Right? But they do need to give you some information. You need to receive it so that the partnerships can be meaningful and have impact.
For our sales agent, he's the one going into all the rooms selling it. I didn't even know how blessed I was to have a sales agent on my team from the get-go. Because he could guide us and make sure that we were not over risking the investors' money, because he was like, this will sell. And then having Dog and Pony Creative, part of my team from the beginning, and they made all of our posters, so we knew our posters would sell. Thank goodness we did that, because I don't think we'd be where we are today if I had said, no, I know better than you.
Oh man, that's so good. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. 5 Talents Fund is glad to bring you the Art and Faith podcast. At 5 Talents Fund, we make good things go further, faster. How can art serve as a pathway for sharing faith? You're a great example of that.
Well, especially in media, as a filmmaker, a film is huge. You don't have to, you can be a missionary all over the world with a film. You don't even have to knock on a door. People turn on their televisions and your film is there. So imagine how you can minister all over the world with a message just by clicking on a TV. And we've had messages from South Africa, for people who've clicked on a television, seen our movie, and it changed their life. So we have a huge responsibility with our art to be able to send out the message of the Lord all over the world without never having to get on an airplane.
Yesterday, we spent the day with this woman who's a brilliant art curator and really an expert in her space. And she would kind of look at paintings, and every 20th painting, she would say, "That is a good painting." And they were all good paintings. They were all things of high regard, but she would just sort of set them aside like that verbally. What do you think makes good art? How do you know when it's good?
I think so for us, especially with faith-based, it's how to weave it in without feeling like it's a sermon. We are always starting with a story. And then within the story, we're weaving in faith. So I feel like, if that's answering the question correctly. Okay. Like with Switch, the whole message is love your neighbor as yourself. So instead of constantly quoting Bible verses, we are showing and leading by example of what does it look like to love your neighbor as yourself? What does it look like to behave this way? And because I think, especially as Christians, when we're speaking to Christians on life is messy and it's hard, and sometimes you'll see a faith-based film and be like, I don't really understand how to put that into my life. And the other thing is, for our art, we feel really passionate that it's not just about life and death. Like, we don't have people almost dying and then they come to Jesus. We're like, it's in the little things. Like Catching Faith is just about a family coming together, telling the truth. And it's very simple, but it's something people struggle with every day on how to teach their children to tell the truth, even when no one's looking. And so we're always, as artists, trying to find a way in to get the audience to maybe not push it on them or be a sermon, but they walk away and think about it and go, oh, I'm going to go look up that verse because that's interesting. And the way they presented it in the movie makes me want to go and study it.
The story took you there.
The story took you there.
Yeah. What is commonly misunderstood about your job, your field in general, just the kind of work you do and the space that you occupy?
Since we started on such small films with very little budget, I had a very small crew. I would actually sometimes at the end of the night, as the producer, writer, creator of the project, be mopping the floors and vacuuming the houses, because we were shooting at people's houses and churches, gifted places. I would stay until everyone was gone and I would mop the floors. And even like the production assistants were like, what is the producer doing mopping the floor? And I'm like, because A, I value this location. B, I'm not going to make you stay out here. I am right there with you. And I also feel as a leader, the best leaders are the one who come alongside everybody and walk with them. I don't point my finger and say, do this. I'll be the first to run off and do it. And also I think that's producer. Everyone thinks you just sit in a chair and you drink your coffee. Well, not on my sets. I am running around helping people. On Catching Faith, I ran almost every single department because we were using a lot of people who didn't know what they were doing. So I was teaching them as we were making the film. And so it's not all glamorous. It's a lot of work, and it's also, you don't always make a ton of money. You see all the magazines and everything, but actually passion projects, a lot of times I'm putting my heart and soul into these films because I care about what I'm doing. And that sustains me. You have to do it because you love it and it's your heart and your passion. The money won't sustain you. It just won't. It has to be a calling on your heart. And, we went to Cuba and our investor came with us to Cuba, and we couldn't technically in front of our investor give the movie away to Cuba, but we knew when we got there that they didn't have any money. They don't even have $1 to buy the movie. And so we got there and we heard the messages. We wanted to leave hard drives with all the churches, but we went to our investor and he said, are you kidding me? Give this out to every single person who needs it, because it was so impactful for him. He was like, this isn't about the money. For me as an investor, I invested in this movie to see what it has done for the women in Cuba and the men in Cuba. And that to me was like, that's the heart of the investor we want to, who's like, it's not about me getting my money back. It's about changing the world. And that's what we're doing. And we were able to give hard drives of the movie out to everybody in Cuba for free.
That's amazing.
And that was awesome.
That's amazing. Would people that you grew up with when you're like 4th, 5th grader, junior high girl be surprised at where you are and how you spend your time now? Or would they say that makes perfect sense?
Oh, I think everyone said it makes perfect sense because I was acting in my father's church in high school. I was like the drama girl. I always wanted to work in the film industry. When I was 14, I started auditioning in Boston. I took it very seriously. I had a portfolio. My father would drive me into Boston for auditions. And so I think everybody, when I brought Wish for Christmas home back to show it, 450 people in my hometown came out to watch the screening.
Yes.
And a lot of my
Good
friends
job, hometown.
Yay! A lot of my friends from high school came and were just like, wow, we're so proud to see that you really went after it and you did it and you're creating movies. So
that's beautiful.
Yeah, it was
I think
really
that gives
awesome.
people courage in all kinds of spaces to do their thing, to open their shop, to serve their community in fresh ways, and just to believe that things can really happen.
They can happen. Yeah. They can happen.
Alexandra, I want to sit here and talk like through lunch and the rest of the afternoon because you are so much fun and you shared so generously and so helpfully. Thank you for your time, and thank you for just being an open book and helping other people to learn from what you've learned. And it's been great to have you on the podcast.